Hey guys, and welcome to another one of my tutorials. In this video, I'll be showing you how to do this cool little typewriter text. So as you can see, when I press a button, it pops up this widget, and it prints out this text letter by letter. And the main focus of this tutorial is the typewriter text and how to do that. So we're not going to be focusing on too much else. So it should be a pretty quick tutorial. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to open up the Epic Game Launcher and launch a new instance of Unreal. I'm on 4.25.1, but it shouldn't really matter too much for this tutorial. I'll give this here a second to load. I've seen a few other tutorials online about how to do this, but they were kind of bad, so I decided to make my own. So we'll select games here, go to next, and then I was just using the third person template and blueprints, no starter content. I'm just going to call this typewriter tutorial. Go ahead and create the project. Yeah, because I saw some tutorials online about how to do this, and they're just really convoluted and overcomplicated, and I figured out a much simpler way to do it, so I figured I'd show you guys how to do that. Okay, so the first thing we need, let me go real quick and move my other project over here. Alright, so the first thing we need, really the only thing we need, is the widget. So let's right click, go to user interface, and hit widget blueprint, and we'll call this the typewriter widget. And so if we open this up, you can set this up to look however you want. I'm just going to do it like I did at the beginning, where it's just down here at the bottom inside of a little border. So to do that, I'm just going to drag in a border onto my canvas panel, and then I'm going to set the anchor to the bottom middle, and then reset the position so it actually goes down there. And then for the size, I'm going to use like 1,000, 200. And then for the alignment, we'll just do like 0.5 and -1, or +1 maybe, +1. And then I want to bring it up a little bit more just so it's not on the bottom of the screen. So I'm going to search for the translation and set the Y value to like -100. There we go. And then we'll give it some color other than white. Oops, that's not the right one. Brush color. Yeah, there we go, brush color. Make it like an orangish color. All right, so there's our border. And then on top of our border, we want to have the actual text. So we'll drag in a text onto our border. So if we click on the text, we want to change a few things about it. So up here, I'm going to set the padding to 0, and then come in here and manually edit each one of these. So left, I'm going to do 20. Right, I'm going to do 20 just so it has some padding around the edges. Top 10, bottom 10. And then I'll set the text color to like a brownish color, something like this. And then we want to go in here and change the wrap mode to auto wrap text. So check this checkbox. And what that does is it makes it so when the text gets to the end of the box over here, it's going to wrap around to the start. Okay, so I think that is everything we need to do on this designer tab. So we can go ahead and hop over to the graph tab now. So inside of here, we can actually delete these because we're not going to need them. And we want to create a few little variables and a few, just one little function that's going to help us out. So come over here on the left, and the first variable we want is going to be called start time stamp. And this is going to be a float. And this will make more sense once we actually use it. But basically what this is it's going to be the time, like the game time that the text writer started, or that the text started writing. And we're going to use this so we can figure out how many characters should be displayed. And we want to set this to private. And I'm going to add it to a private category as well. Just keep things organized. And then we want another boolean. So we'll make a variable. Actually, if you just duplicate this one instead, so if you right click and duplicate, it will copy the private stuff and put it in the correct category. So let's just do that. Except this one we're going to be called, or this one's going to be called writing, and it's going to be a boolean. And so this is going to be true if it's currently writing out text, and it's going to be false if it hasn't started yet or if it's finished. And then we want one more private variable for the actual text. So duplicate this again, and we'll call this one the text, and we'll make this a string. And then we want one more variable, except this is going to be a constant variable, and this variable is going to represent how fast the characters write out to the screen. So make a variable and call it characters, or just chars for short, which is just letters. Characters are just letters, if you don't know. Characters per second, and we'll change this to a float. And we want to make this private, blueprint read-only, instance editable, and expose on spawn. And basically what these all do is, well, private obviously makes it private so that nobody else can access it. Expose on spawn will make it so that when we create an instance of this widget, you'll be able to modify this value right there inside of the node, and I'll show you that here in a little bit once we get there. Blueprint read-only essentially makes it constant so that you can see if you drag it in, you can't actually set it, so you can only get it. And we want that because we don't want to accidentally change this value, so blueprint read-only. And instant editable, you pretty much just need to check this one if you have exposed on spawn checked, otherwise it won't work. All right, and then I'm going to put this inside of a constants category, like so. It's nice and organized. And then we need one little event dispatcher, and then we'll be done with the variables. So over here on the left, click this event dispatcher, and we'll call this finished writing. And this is going to get triggered whenever the text has fully finished writing. And this is just kind of a convenience thing I thought I'd add so that you can bind to it. But we're not doing a whole lot with it in this tutorial, other than we're going to bind to it so that we can destroy the widget once it's done, but you can use it for many other things. All right, so now that we have our variable set up, we can go back here to the event graph. And the first thing we want to do is we want to add a custom event called write. That's going to be called whenever the person using this widget wants to start writing. So we'll say add custom event, and we'll call it write, like so. And then we want this to take in a string. So actually we can just drag in our text from over here and say set. And then if we hook this up and we drag this pink node onto the right node, it will automatically hook that up for us. But before we set this, we want to make sure that we're not already writing, because when somebody calls this, we want to make sure that it's not already happening. So we want to drag in writing, say get, and then drag over this and say not. So we want to say if we're not writing, and then we can do a branch and hook that up here. So if we're not already writing, then let's go ahead and continue. And the first thing we want to do is we want to set writing to true. So drag in writing again, say set, hook it up to true, and set this checkbox here so that it sets to true. And then I'm just going to double click on this pink line and make a little reroute nodes here. Move it around with the arrow keys just so it's a little more organized. All right, so again, just to recap, all we're doing is whenever they call write, we're making sure that we're not already writing, and then we're setting writing to true, and then we're saving this text into a variable so that we can reference it later. And so once we have this done, we want to save the timestamp, because remember here we made this start timestamp. And again, what this is going to represent the time that the widget started writing the text. So if we drag this in, we say set, and then we want to set it to get game time in seconds. And what this is, if you hover over it, it says it gets the current game time in seconds. This stops when the game is paused and is affected by slow-mo. So this is exactly what we want, because obviously if they pause the game or there's some slow-mo going on, we want the text to also pause or write slower. So we want to be using this variable. So this is going to set the start timestamp to whatever the current game time is. And then finally, the last thing we want to do is we want to just set the text, like this text over here, to be cleared out so that when we start writing, there won't be anything there. And to do that, we actually need to come over here and click on the text. And then up here at the top right, where there's this is variable checkbox, we want to check that. And that will make it a variable, and then we can name it. Currently, it's called text block 118. We'll just call it like the text block, just so it's a little less weird. So now if we come back over here, you can see on the left, it's created this variable for us for the text box. So we can just drag this in now and say set text, hit this, and then we're just going to leave the in text empty, and that way it will clear it. All right, so now that we have this, we don't actually have it writing anything to the screen. So the next thing we need to do is write the code that's going to show characters one at a time as time progresses. And to do that, we're going to be using the event tick. So we'll say event tick. So inside of here, the very first thing we want to do is make sure that we are writing, because otherwise we don't want it to do anything. So we'll drag in writing, and we'll make a branch. Hook that up. So if we are currently writing, then we want to, do the logic to write out the characters. So I'm going to make a little function for that over here on the left. I'm just going to call it write text. And so back here in the event graph, I'm just going to drag in the write text so we can call it once we're writing. And then we can go in here and fill this out. So if we come in write text, so again, this function is going to be responsible for, all the logic to figure out, how many characters should be displayed on the screen at once. So it's going to start with 0, then it's going to go to 1, 2, 3, 4. And it's going to do it at the speed based off this characters per second. So we can basically break this function down into 3 steps. The first thing we want to do is calculate how many characters should be displayed this frame, and then we want to display them, and then we want to check if we are finished writing out the entire string, and if we are, we want to call our little finished writing thing. So I'll just make a comment here to start with, just so we can see what I'm talking about. So the first thing we want to do is calculate how many characters should be displayed this frame. So that's step 1. So to do that, we're going to use that handy get game time in seconds. So this is going to return to us the current game time. And we want to take this value and we want to subtract the timestamp from it. So we'll say float minus. We'll drag in our start timestamp. So what this is basically doing is it's getting the elapsed time from when we started writing the text, like from when this event was called, and now. So I'm just going to add a little comment here and say this is the elapsed time. And if we take this value and we multiply it by the number of characters that we want to display per second, it will tell us how many characters should be displayed this frame. So we'll say float multiply by the characters per second. And then, as you can see here, this is returning to us a float. And obviously we want this to be an integer value and not a float. So to do that, we're going to use the floor function. And all floor does is it just rounds the number down. So for example, like 4.2 becomes just 4, 7.3 becomes 7. So it just rounds the number down. And then we want to take this final number and we want to clamp it to make sure it doesn't get larger than the number of characters that are in our little text array here. So we'll just say clamp. And we want to clamp it between 0 and the number of characters in this text. So we'll just drag in this text and say length. It's just called len, stands for length. And that's our max. And then finally, we can take this value, and I'm just going to promote it to a local variable, so we can save it and hook this up. And so here's our little local variable that it created on the left. And we'll just call this like num chars to display. So the number of characters to display for this frame. All right, so that's step 1. We've calculated how many characters we want to display this frame. The next thing we need to do is actually display them. So to do that, we want to drag in our text. So we'll say get text. And there's actually a handy function where you can say, hey, only display, this many characters in this string. And it's just called get substring. And so it's asking for the starting index, which is going to always be 0 because we're always starting, at the first character. And then we want to go up to the length, which is our number of characters to display. So I'm just going to drag that in. And so this is going to be the actual string that we want to display for this frame. So if you remember, we want to set our text again. So we'll drag in the text block and we'll say set text. Make sure you hit set text and not set tooltip text. Just set text, and we'll hook that up. And then for the end text, we want to drag in our string, and it's going to do a little conversion here because it has to convert the string to a text, but that's fine. So that's step 2. Just add a little comment here. 2, display text to screen. And then finally, the last thing we want to do is check if we are finished writing. And if we are, we want to call our little finished writing event dispatcher so that anybody who's listening to it will be aware. So to do that, it's pretty simple. We just want to check if this number of characters to display is greater than or equal to the length of the characters in this string. So to do that, we can just drag in our number of characters, and we'll say int greater than equal to, and then I'm just going to come over here and copy our text length, because that's what we want. So I copy those 2 nodes, paste it. So if it's greater than equal to the length of the text, do a branch. And if this is true, we want to set writing to false. So drag in writing, set it to false. And then we want to call our event dispatcher. So drag in our event dispatcher for finished writing and hit call. And there we go. Just add a little comment around this. So step 3 is check if we're finished writing and call our event dispatcher. All right, so there we go. So now we can actually make use of this widget. So we can do that in our character. So we come back here to our world, select our little character, go to the 3rd person character blueprint. I'm just going to come down here to the bottom and make it so that this widget shows up whenever you press the F key. Obviously in your game, you can show this widget at other times if you want. You can use the F key just to demonstrate. So I'm going to say input F, and let me find this F key. There we go, keyboard event F. So when it's pressed, we want to say create widget, and then the widget we want to create is our typewriter widget. And you can see when I selected the typewriter widget, it added this little green node for the characters per second. And again, that's because back here in our typewriter widget, we have our characters per second set to expose on spawn. So that's what that does. If you didn't already know that, it makes it so that it shows up right here so that you can easily set it to something. So let's say that the number of characters per second is 20. So every second, it will show 20 characters. So if you want it to be faster or slower, you can just change the value here. It's pretty simple. So hook this up. It needs the owning player. So this is a player controller is what it's looking for. So we can just say get controller. And then since we're inside of the player, we know that this controller is a player controller. So we can just cast to player controller. And then I'm just going to convert this to a pure cast, so we don't have to hook it up. And then hook it up to there. So now we have our widget created. The next thing we want to do is we want to add this to the viewport so we can actually see it. So add to viewport. And then I'm going to double click to create a little reroute node here because we're going to need to do a few more things. And so now we want to call our little write function, because remember back here in the event graph, we made this little write function. So we want to call that. So we'll say write, write. And then we can basically just pass here whatever we want it to say. So I'm just going to type, I think, what I typed in the tutorial. We're just going to say, hello, this is an example of typewriter text. As you can see, each character is being printed out line by line. And then we'll just say goodbye, ... Okay. So that's what we're going to print out to the screen. And then finally, we want to bind to our finished writing event dispatcher so that we're notified when the widget finishes writing this text. So if we drag off of this and we say assign, it will pop up. It says assign finished writing. If we click on that, it will do 2 things. It will create a node up here that we can bind. So we'll hook that up. And what that's doing is it's binding this red event down here to the finished writing event dispatcher. So basically, whenever this whenever this gets called at the end here, call finished writing, this event is going to get called. So inside of here, we just want to maybe go ahead and delete this widget because it's finished. So I'm just going to add a little delay so it doesn't happen right away. Delay like 2 seconds, and then drag off this and say remove from parent, which remove from parent basically removes it from the screen, and then Unreal will eventually delete it because it realizes it's no longer needed. And you can do whatever else you want here. I just kind of hooked this up as a way to show you guys how to get notified when it's finished. But yeah, this is how you would do it. All right, so I think at this point we might be good to test this out, and hopefully if we didn't mess up, then it works. So let's go ahead and hit play, and I'm gonna hit F. You can say press F and it popped it up, and then it starts printing things out. And then hopefully when it finishes, it will close automatically, and there we go. And again, if you want to change the speed of it, you can set it to like 10 and it will go much slower, half the speed. The other thing that's worth noting here, I just want to show you guys, this is a really good approach because if you pause the game or something, it's also going to pause the text. So just as an example, real quick, if I bind the pause key, so add custom event, or not that, input P, let me find the P key real quick. This will be real quick. I just want to show you guys that it works even if you pause it. So the P key, and we'll do a little flip-flop, and then we'll say pause game. Oops. Pause game. Set pause game. Look up these and look up that. So now you can see if I pause it in the middle. So the game is paused right now. And you can see the text also pauses. And then if I unpause, oh, I need to set this to execute when paused. So run this again. So it's printing. I pause it, unpause it. You can see it starts right where it left off. So that's a really nice thing about this. Also, if you enable slow-mo, I think that's how you do that. How do you do that? Oh, it's like, oh, it's slow-mo with no W. Slow-mo 0.2. So now we have slow-mo enabled. If I hit F, you can see it also slows down the text. So it's a really nice system because it just kind of works no matter what you do. And it's really easy to set up, especially compared to all the other systems. So yeah, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe. I also have a Patreon in the link, or in the description, a link to it. If you want to support me there, that'd be awesome. I'll see you guys in the next video.